as we make these advancements like technology, the bad guys are always going to find a way to use it for no good. Welcome to the CNL Podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of IT and security professionals to uncover their experiences, challenges, and best practices in today's ever-evolving tech landscape. I'm your host, Sedric Louissant, also known as your cyber expert, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Director of Technology at Altamont Capital Partners, Peter. How are you doing? I didn't want to butcher your last name. How do you say your last name, Peter?
Last name is Eichelberger. I appreciate you not butchering it, but I've had to live with that one for a while. I'm sure that Louissant is kind of a hard one to get out there as well. So
You
nice.
actually said it right. Most
Of
people
course.
they never really they always say Louis Saint even after I enunciate it, it was like okay.
And I grew up in a town where Versailles Street was pronounced for sales and still is pronounced for sales. So
All right, Eichelberg, I'll remember that. All right, awesome. So, can you tell me a little bit about, your background and your journey and how you got started in IT and security?
yeah, I don't know if you got that much time, but I've been in for several decades. Let's just leave it at that. I started out involved with a lot of the initial DOS-based, MS-DOS, going back to CPM machines, et cetera. So I've got quite the track record. Owned a couple of companies that did computer repairs, rentals, leasing, and then went into consulting practice for about 25 years, where I was specializing in small businesses. Worked as a director of IT for Havas International, which is a large Paris-based advertising agency. Did some startup work during the dot-com. Nothing successful, unfortunately. I could have been employee number 38 at Salesforce, but I said no to that. There was one other one that I missed out on, but it was, same kind of thing where it's like, no, I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to do. Got into private equity when I was a senior vice president for IT in Cranston, Rhode Island, for a very small casual jewelry company called Alex and Ani that was going through some mega growth at the time. They'd gone from about 4 million in sales to 240 million in sales in 18 months and needed some systems put in place. So I fell into PE at that point in time, ended up back on the West Coast and got an opportunity here with Altamont Capital as a consultant, and then they turned me into an employee shortly after that, sort of try before you buy kind of situation. And I've been here
Yeah.
now for starting my 6th year, working with them as their lead in technology. So I oversee all of the technology implementation for the people within our fund. And then I act as an advisor to the 29 portfolio companies that we have out there. So kind of a point source for that. In the last 18 months, I've also been pulled aside and told that I'm in charge of AI. So cyber AI, data compliance, data security, those are all kind of underneath the hood, what I'm responsible for at this point in time.
Okay, that's awesome. Was there a specific event that made you choose this field? Why IT and security?
Well, I mean, IT, that goes back to the days of taking stuff apart and putting them back together. I used to teach a technology class where that's literally what we would do to demystify some of the aspects of computing in general, so people understand that it's literally just a mechanical piece of equipment that has some fancy bells and whistles to it. I was teaching for about 35 years those types of classes, technology enablement, communications, doing a lot of implementation for some of the large Fortune 500 companies that are based here in the Bay Area. And I liked it. I mean, it was an opportunity for me to have a conversation in normal language with people that don't understand some of the things that I do. And so I can kind of sit in that layer between the super geeky techs that, most people just kind of glaze over when they're talking to them.
Yeah.
By taking on that instructor role, consulting role, I actually had to make those implementations make sense to people, show or ROI out of them, keep systems up and running, fits well with my personality, 24/7, go, go, go. And so that's kind of why I fell into that particular aspect of the business.
I hear that. I hear that. I was always the kid that loved breaking things, to
Yeah.
taking them apart, to put them back together. My mother didn't really appreciate the skill back then, but she does now.
Yeah, exactly.
And definitely I can understand with having to, understand how to tailor the message to your audiences to make it make sense. That's something that I had to learn earlier in my career, because sometimes if you just nerd out or geek out too much,
Yeah.
it just goes right over the head.
Yeah, when I got into private equity, they have a lot of acronyms that they use as well, and so I'm constantly, trying to figure out different types of EBITDA, what they mean when they're talking about
Yep.
CAGRs, all these, CAGRs for me in college were different than they are now as I'm dealing with finance. So
Yep. I think I just learned about the EBITDA term not too long ago too myself, so
yeah,
I
yeah,
can definitely understand that. It's always a new acronym. That's why you always got to double check. What do you mean by that per
yeah,
se? Or do
yeah.
you Google and you add some context
The
around the
context, exactly.
situation?
Which industry are you talking about? Yeah, we
Yep.
of insurance concerns, and there's a whole nother set of items that are used, acronyms that are used in that. And so I always have to go back and check myself, make sure I know what I'm talking about when I'm referencing that information. And you get into cyber, oh my God, there's a million acronyms in cyber. And, now we've got NIST, we've got all of these different systems in place, and, trying to explain those to the executive team as to why we need to have MFA, why we need to have a secondary authentication pass, why we need to make sure that
Yep.
we've got encrypted data at rest and in transit. All of those things just have to be in place in order to secure the environment, but they also have to be understood by executives so that they're able to know that we're on the right path on protecting the data of the company.
Yeah, so they're not coming to you like, why is my password being forced to change? Well, why do I need to make it more than 14 characters?
Yeah, or I just bought a new phone and now I can't get to anything, and it's like, okay, well, we need to re-encrypt that certificate so that your authorization device actually works. So yeah, so there's a lot
Yeah.
of that going on. So and I think with the advent of AI, I just finished a 6-month program with MIT, and with the advent of AI, it's only going to get worse. So
Oh, I've
going
already
to
seen
keep
it.
us
I've
busy
seen
for a while.
firsthand with some I was talking with one of our last guests about this. This is what a time to be alive,
Yeah,
because with AI, the fact that some of these companies are implementing these large language models to facilitate some of the mundane tasks that some of their employees used to have to spend a lot of their time doing. Like, for example, financial institution, I've seen a financial institution implement their chatbot ability to query any of the accounts, facilitate certain transactions, and a part of certain AI red teams. There have been certain engagements where they've been able to compromise these large language models to give other people's bank account balance, to
oh yeah,
get it to send money, and made that company think, hey, let's actually pull that back. Let's make sure we're doing this right from the beginning, and let's test this. So AI
yeah.
red teaming is now actually a new thing that people are realizing that they need to do. OWASP came out with some guidance on there, but yeah, it's definitely a cat and mouse game, and only going to get more complex as we make these advancements in technology. The bad guys are always going to find a way to use it for no good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the some of the risk modeling that we use in cyber is really applicable. As you mentioned, you're doing an AI red team. That's basically just stealing it from the cyber playbook and putting it into place so that you
Mhm.
can cover any liability that you might see in that. The one thing that's concerning for me is a lot of this, and I saw it in the 90s with shadow IT, where the marketing department would start up a file server, throw it under somebody's desk, and we would never know about it, right? You're old enough to remember that, right?
Yep. And I'm
And
still seeing that today in today's day and age, where marketing department is spinning up resources on third party SaaS, and
yeah,
they're just taking company data, uploading it over there, and then we're
yeah,
finding out after the other company gets popped that our data was on there.
yeah. That's so prevalent right now, and with AI, it's the same thing. We're trying to keep employees from using public AI tools because they're sucking in the prompts for training data. So we've had to
Mhm.
isolate that. That's been, part of the planning that we've had to do here. But the manufacturers, as I like to say, you'll fire up Adobe Acrobat and suddenly you've got an AI companion. You'll fire up, Microsoft and, Copilot sitting right there on the taskbar kind of stuff. And
Yep.
so it's really being foisted upon us, I guess is the best way to look at it, and not always 100% thought out. So that's, it means you have to go through and do a lot of data structuring and data hygiene in order to make sure that if you are going to implement it, you're implementing it safely and within the, we're a compliant, so SEC could jump on me if I'm doing something wrong with the AI. So we have to be
Yep.
pretty careful with it, but I also have to, take and deal with, we have very young people that I deal with. We have an internship program, so I'm dealing with 21, 22-year-olds all the time, and they've been using AI now for 2 or 3 years. They love it. They want to use it. They're going to use it, but it's just a matter of making sure that they're not leveraging it to our disadvantage or breaking any of the laws that we have to comply with.
Yep, yep. And I think that starts with first training the users, because like you said, they may have been using it, but there's a certain way you got to go about to make sure that you guys are using it securely. Like, hey, try not to put any personal company data at all into any publicly, because if you're going to allow it, because some companies, some companies, they have taken the route to deploy their own private models, right? And just set up DNS redirecting to go to wherever their models are. So that way the company, the employees can use it securely. So depending on however you go about it, if you want to take it to the nth degree and do that, I think if you roll out the proper training, because they're going to use it regardless, right? They'll pull out their phones and they'll start using it that way, whatnot. But you might as well embrace it, because, like you said, it's being foisted upon us. I just got the prompt for Apple Intelligence on my computer earlier, and I was like,
You just rolled.
it's like it's everywhere. And I was thinking about Recall, the
Microsoft Recall that they just put back out.
I said, yeah. I was like, yeah. And what the researchers found with that, I was like, yeah, it's really being just foisted upon us. So it starts with just educating the users, right? And just getting them. And OWASP has some good guidance on this too. Don't over rely on it. Make sure you're double checking it. Don't put any sensitive data in there. Use high level prompts to just help guide you where you're trying to go. But you don't need it to do every last little bit. We're trying to get it to do every last little bit. And there's even steps you can take to make sure that you can configure, if you're using ChatGPT or Notebook or Microsoft's LLMs, where you can set it to supposedly not train on your data. But we're taking them at face value there. I won't say too much about that.
Yeah, the other thing is that there's a little aspect that I'm asked to do sometimes, which gets into a little gray area for me, which is like just do really tight monitoring. And they're like, well, can we see what people are putting into the prompts? In other words, can we spy on our employees? And I know that that's something that we're capable of doing, but it's questionable whether or not it's something that we should do. This is just same as when I'm filtering for email. Sometimes I have to look at the messages, and sometimes they're not things that I really should be looking at, but I have to look at them.
Yep.
So we're in a constant struggle there as well. And I think that there's a lot of pushback that I'll give them, which is like, well, we don't look at every single Google search that someone does, because I kind of put the OpenAI, any of the Claude, any of that stuff, I kind of put it in that same category that we saw with Google when it first came out. And I go back to Ask Jeeves and Alta Vista and some of these other ones, and suddenly, people started using Google and nobody really said anything about it, even though the data sources aren't really validated. And, so we do have to be a little bit challenged in that. And it's the same thing going on with ChatGPT, where, it's very authoritative in its answers, but it's not always accurate. Right.
Exactly.
So, that's the caveat. That's where we do train our users and create some awareness of the fact that, trust but verify, and make sure that you're not just putting this out as a wholesale product. We're starting to get a lot of diligence requests from our investors asking us, how much of your work product is AI generated versus human generated. So it's becoming more and more of a business issue for us, and certainly is becoming more prevalent in a day-to-day. And I think with some of the accelerations that we're going to see in private equity in 2025, I think it's going to become if we don't have the guardrails in place by the time that they start really leveraging it and the market starts to pick up again, that we're going to
Mhm.
be behind the eight ball. So that's why we're trying to be as proactive as we can in getting tools and, guidance in place now. And that's something I've been working pretty diligently on for the last 12 months.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and if any of our listeners take away anything from that, is just understand that AI is complex and you got to do your due diligence. Depending on your industry and how it could impact you, it's gonna vary.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's also interesting from a scope. I don't know what geographic area your podcast covers, but I'm involved with some global CISO organizations, and as I like to say, when I'm on the West Coast, it's all about it. It's snowballing here. It's going to accelerate even more so in the next 12 months. I go to the East Coast and they're sort of dipping their toe in the water.
mhm.
When they see it, they're pretty amazed by it. They're kind of still have the OGs. And then when I
Yep.
deal with some of the organizations, and especially in Germany and mainland Europe, not so much in the UK, and they're just like, there's no way. It's too impinging on privacy. Getting
Yep.
around GDPR is really, really challenging for us in that environment. And so, as I like to say, there's a hell yes, a maybe, and a hell no as you go across the globe.
Yep. Yeah, to various jurisdictions, they're approaching it a little bit differently, and I applaud what they're doing over there in the EU, the GDPR, and how they're being proactive, and they've put some I believe they've came out with some legislation saying, you can't be using this AI to make any decisions that's going to impact any human life,
Right.
right? Just leave it at that, because I think that's key, because I don't think we're at a point where these large language models are mature enough to where we can trust them trust them to the degree that I feel comfortable with, because I've seen the products hallucinate
Yeah. Yeah.
firsthand, and some people will take that to the grave and think that the Chat GPT is right, and it's just like, oh
Yeah.
no, this is
There,
not what
there's
we
a
want as a
there's a whole
society.
societal conversation we can have on that one, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, wow, and if the society really thinks that, hey, ChatGPT is now the source of truth, oh wow, whoever controls those sources of ChatGPT controls the minds of the masses, I would say, but that's a whole other conversation for another day that we could geek out on. What do you feel right now is the biggest security threat that you're seeing to your industry specifically? Do you feel
We're
that?
still we're still getting hit with BECs. I mean, I don't know, and I think that the here's where I think AI is really, and the joke I make is the email that you get from the oil minister from whatever African country that sends it to you. To remember that one that came out? It's like,
Yeah, yep.
instead of having typos and poor grammar in it, now it's going to have good grammar and no typos, right?
Yep, and understand those nuances of that country's language. Like
You're right.
they're able to tailor with the contextual awareness around certain phrases to where it's not going to throw you off anymore, right? It's like you said,
Right.
no more punctual grammar mess ups. It's like these emails are coming in perfectly structured with a nice call to action in it. It's
Yep.
very believable. They're setting up real email infrastructure, and they're not really spoofing anything, so the email makes it past the spam filter. So because there's really nothing to actually alert on for the
Yeah,
spam filter.
they create a domain that's got DKIM and SPF, and boom, it just comes right through.
Yup, DKIM, DMARC, all that is just like, come on, like, and
Yeah.
these are people that are the smart ones that are really invested, and they want to see a return on investment. And at that point, it just really comes down to the technical controls that are implemented right after someone just fails and they click on that phishing link. Is there something that's going to stop them or warn them? And at least in the email banner, right? It says, "Hey, external. This is not internal. Please think about what you're doing."
Yeah,
Um,
and that's that. I think that that's still going to continue because all the reporting that I read, it's still anything that has human intervention is the area that they're going to leverage. They'll social engineer it. They'll impersonate. They'll do a number of different things. But the thing that I've noticed is rather than just being kind of wholesale, they'll be a little bit more passive in their interjection. Good example is they'll go and they'll change routing information on an invoice.
Hmm.
So they'll get into an email system, they'll find an invoice that's due to be paid. They will change that invoice with new routing information, resubmit it with a more aggressive, hey, how come you haven't paid us yet?
Hmm.
And if the accounting department doesn't recognize that there's been a change in that, that money is going to go to the wrong direction. That type of thing is actually, I always love this because IT always gets blamed for that when it's a problem within the process in
Yeah,
the,
within the process itself, as you're talking there, I'm thinking to myself, like, no, that's not an IT. Yeah, IT could the security controls can only do so much, right?
right.
And that's what I tell people because I've been hacking is my thing. I've been hacking for 10 plus years now, and I tell organizations that there's if you want something to be 100% secure, just turn it off, unplug it.
Yep.
You don't have a business no more.
Right.
But they're like, well, how are we gonna do business? Well, it's gonna be a cat and mouse game forever. So you
It's
have
a
to
risk model.
plan. You have to plan if you're gonna fail. You
Yeah.
know, at some point in time, some controls might fail. You got 0 days coming out like hotcakes now.
Yep.
Like every single day, there's multiple 0 days where some of them are zero click, and you don't even have to do anything. And it's like how am I going to compete with that? So you have to make sure your processes or have been built to withstand those failures, right? Like double calling to verify that
Yep.
routing information, right? That's another way of control that you can implement, and that's on the accounting department. The accounting department could easily do that. And I see in the real estate with some of the real estate firms that I deal with that they've had to learn the hard way because they've
Yeah.
lost hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars worth of their clients' funds, all because their systems were compromised and they didn't do any double due diligence in that wiring process after the fact. But I can definitely understand what you. Yeah, business email compromise is gonna keep on coming, and with AI, it's only just gonna keep getting worse.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the strongest areas. And then the other one, we mentioned this with the shadow IT. The servers that used to be under the desks are now just being spun in the cloud. So, the marketing department decides that they want to implement, say, ADIO, but they don't want
Yep.
it on their SaaS. They want to put it on a private cloud. So they spin that up. Some smart kid that just came out of college knows how to do it. He does it, but it's admin, no MFA activated, things along
Yup.
those lines. And so, since you mentioned you're a hacker, I mean, those when you do that, you're literally, you know, walking around with no protection whatsoever.
Yup. You're
It's the
asking to get popped.
emperor's new clothes, if you know what I mean.
Yup.
And so that's really just a matter of having awareness. And I think that, strong partnerships and with your vendors are critical. Whether that's your knock sock, whether that's whatever you're using for your endpoint detection, looking at your traffic and seeing when you've got exfiltration, DLPs need to be in place. And then, the other thing is you kind of have to scare the executive team because if you have a data breach, right?
Hmm.
It's reputational damage, so you're hitting your brand, which I know IT guys
Also
shouldn't
market
think about
shares.
that, but I do.
Hmm.
And then you've also got potential for really substantial fines if PII escapes. So you
Yep.
have to really segment your data. You've really got to make sure that your risk profiles are minimized as much as possible to still be in business in order to
Hmm.
do that. And when you're in highly regulated industries, whether that's financial, health services, insure tech, some of the things that we touch base on, in addition to being, under SEC compliance regs. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that because we're in an equity group, we have people that give us significant amounts of capital to invest on their behalf, and they don't want us to be doing stupid stuff with that. So,
Of course.
we sit at a nexus on that. And that's part of the reason why I drive so hard to make sure that I'm on top of that and I'm able to provide find resources, find partners, find tools that will help me to manage that a little bit more efficiently. And it is becoming, more and more concerning as new things are developing through time here.
Yeah, and like as you said, with all these new different SaaSes coming out, and just different. The teams, they want speed, speed, speed. Because I get it, speed sometimes it's the difference between making a business or breaking it. But
Yeah.
sometimes if you may think that speed is everything and you're booming, you're doing great business. But if, like you said, if there that risk, if something happens, you get popped, and that risk of whatever got compromised is enough to bankrupt you,
Right.
oh, you're gonna be in a whole heap of trouble.
Yeah,
So,
you look at some of the recent fines that SEC imposed on some of the financial institutions for use of WhatsApp and some of these other tools, and
mhm,
they were, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And yeah, Chase Bank can absorb that, and it kind of goes into
mhm.
their balance sheet on some bottom line. But I wouldn't be sitting here if we got hit for $100 million fine. I know that.
Oh yeah, I know the people that I've worked with in the past, they've dealt with some of those types of fines, and I've actually dealt with teams that have were dealing with incidents, and then when I dealt with them again about a year later, those same people weren't around on that team for that organization. So
Yeah.
I can definitely understand. It's a cutthroat. It can be cutthroat sometimes. So
Even at the vendor level, I've seen that 2021 was a real uptick. And so a lot of people thought, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money setting up a cybersecurity firm. And, a lot of kids would, join in that. You don't necessarily need a 4-year degree to become a knock agent or do anything along those lines. And a
mhm,
lot of those ones, they didn't set up their models correctly. And so now they're starting to either be acquired or, swept up, and
yep, competing with
and
some of
that's
the
just
bigger
kind of the
companies.
direction that they go in. And if they're large enough and they have enough momentum, they'll get eaten up by one of the large companies like Mandiant got bought out,
Mhm.
some of these other ones, but the rest of them sometimes they just end up being, either nickel and dime players, they get swept into an MSSP or, something along those lines. So that's where you have to manage your vendor relationships and make sure that you're aware of where their financial status is, are they having a high level of turnover, what are those types of things, which,
Mhm.
that's just common business sense on that.
Yeah, and I know you say it's common business sense, but like my mother used to tell me, common sense sometimes isn't too common.
Very true.
Uh, so what's your philosophy when it comes to balancing innovation and security? Because it's always a constant
Yeah.
trade-off.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that?
Um, well, innovation is good. Let's just put that on the table first. But innovation has to be done intelligently. And so a lot of times what we'll do, obviously, with POCs is we'll use a risk model when we roll something out. In other words, what's the worst case scenario of this AI? We're getting into agentic stuff now, thanks to Mark Benioff. And these agents that you can create could actually generate revenue for you. Obviously, very interesting. You don't have to work; money just comes into your bank account, kind of like that. Um, but
You
at
got
the
to
same
oversee them.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, the fact is that it could go in the wrong direction. People might not be happy about the fact that you're sitting back and just making money. And so
Yep.
you kind of have to look at it from what's the worst case scenario. Again, red teaming is a good example of that before you roll anything out. And
Mm.
the catch up that you run into in IT and technology in general is people will just go ahead without having any conversation or consideration for it. They will, as I like to say, they'll ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
Yep.
And,
They'll ask you on the
and
back end after the crap hits the fan.
pretty much. So that's where it's awareness, it's communication, it's talking to your team members, talking, in our case, portfolio leadership. We need to be aware of what they may be trying to implement. And then if they're doing something that we know is a little bit on the fringe, then we might call it to their attention or say, have you thought about doing it this way, and present, potentially better or more concise methods of getting the same task accomplished, but not necessarily with the level of risk that they might need. In private equity, in the industry that we're in, you want to buy a company, you want to make it better, and then you want to sell it, right? And
Yep.
that's a value plan that you put into place and execute. And some of the stuff needs to be foundational. We buy very, very early stage organizations or, smaller companies, I guess is a better way to talk about it. Part of that is because it's easy to get a 4x out of $100 million company than it is out of $100 billion company. It's just
Yeah.
math. Yeah, it's just
Yep.
simple math. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're taking way too much risk or you're growing too fast or you don't have controls in place.
Mhm.
In another career, not here, but in another situation where somebody was just they literally were just farming off of a technology that was about 10 or 15 years old. And when I came into the organization and I looked at it, it was like, we're paying more to support this antiquated equipment. We have higher risk, and then we would be paying to convert to a modern program.
Yep.
But, again, they didn't want to do anything about it after I left that organization, mostly because of that conflict. A year or two went by and suddenly they were down for 6 months because that old system had failed and there was no recourse to it. I mean, it literally gets to the point where guys my age that know how to run Unix and how to, do ls-l and, go into root and do all that. We're all dying off. And so it's like somebody's got to still be able to support some of those old IBM systems, COBOL,
Yep.
Fortran.
Yep. Those
It's
mainframes, yep,
crazy.
those DB2 systems. Yeah,
When's the
definitely.
last time you wrote a batch file, right?
Yeah, that's definitely been some time. And I appreciate the foundations that you've all laid before my time and my generation, because my stepfather, he tells me about all the things that he used to do. He's on the network and engineering side, and
Yeah.
that's all. Yeah, I'm the PowerShell, the script, the bash guy. Like, I appreciate all the work that you've done, but I'm gonna stick with my PowerShell, Python, and all my new stuff, my new tools.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's interesting when you talk about that generational thing on that too. Yes, there is a lot of foundational stuff that the older generation put in place. I mean, you guys didn't suffer through dial-up modems and bulletin boards and all the
I
stuff.
suffered through dial-up. I'm dating myself. So I dealt with the AOL,
Yeah, yeah,
waiting for that to come up. I was
yeah.
that family IT guy at like 5, 6 years old.
Good for you. But yeah, it's funny because I coach youth athletics, and part of my thing, I've got 3 kids, so it's you also are trying to figure out like what their mindset is and what they're,
Mhm.
because they don't have to think about connectivity. It just is there. They don't
They were
have to
born
think
with it.
about, they don't have to think about hitting the TV or adjusting the antenna. That's really old school.
Mhm.
But that just
Yep,
doesn't
it's
happen
slaps
anymore.
aside.
It's a matter of, oh, I've got crappy Wi-Fi. I can't watch Netflix on my phone.
Mhm.
So it's a very, very different world that they're coming up in. A
Yep.
lot of the kids that I coached in soccer are now graduating as software engineers or they're in data science. They're moving in those directions. And in some cases, they're disappointed because a lot of the AI is taking away some of the software engineering
Mhm.
jobs. But at the same time, the AI is also creating a lot of new opportunities for them if
Yep.
they're interested in moving in those directions. So, yeah, like you said, we're at as I like to say, we're at an inflection point. And in my career, I've seen 4 or 5 of them.
Mhm.
And not, it's not like I try to take advantage of them. I just try to be aware of them so that we can, put the correct things in place, whether it's guardrails or protections or limitations, so that we don't end up going down the wrong road. I mean, obviously, internet growth in the late 90s was just out of this world. You could go
Mhm.
and get money to start a website to do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing when it came to app development until, Store and Apple
Yep.
Store started shutting some of that stuff down. So, it's a real interesting opportunity for us at this point in time. And I know with the education that I've gone through, we're going to see massive advances in medicine. We're going to see massive advances in a lot of manufacturing and design and development, as well as IT and in cyber. So it's sort of like, hang on, it's coming. That's just what we've got to be in that mode to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely understand that. And there's definitely more opportunities. I try to tell people the same thing. There are a lot of opportunities that are going to be getting taken away from AI. That's just a fact. but
Yeah.
there's going to be more opportunities that will be created from AI. You just got to understand how to position yourself, educate yourself on how you can take advantage of these technologies. And that's what I tell some of the people who are just starting out, or they're trying to pivot and find a way for themselves. That's one of the most important skills, I would say, to just educate yourself on what's to come, right?
Yeah.
With AI. Don't embrace it. Understand how you can leverage it, use it securely, and get the most ROI out of it.